I've known him for 15 years, and I know that because he visited the hospital the day my son was born. I have a picture of him in the hospital with my wife and my child. I knew him at Vanderbilt, where he was one of the youngest tenured faculty members ever to be at Vanderbilt. He's like a whiz kid. He finished his PhD in like 2 years and then got tenure in 3 years. And you know, he's my same age, but he's already been a full professor for a decade or more and bounced around at least to one other job other than Vanderbilt. Brilliant. He's a brilliant scholar, prolific scholar. His research focuses on a topic that I'm really interested in, which is how religion impacts educational attainment, how religion impacts gender, basically the social implications of religion, with a special focus on fundamentalism. But he's not talking about that tonight. So tonight he's going to talk about this study that was published this summer that was quite controversial about outcomes for children of same-sex parents. And he's going to explain this, but just to give you a prelude, Darren was asked to provide the meta-analysis of the review process for this quite controversial study. As a result, he's been getting hate emails from both people in the gay and lesbian community who have a certain view of this, and people in the religious community who have a different view of this. And as a scientist, he's trying to ride that tightrope somehow. So anyway, Darren Sherkat is a professor of sociology at Southern Illinois University, prolific scholar, and we're really glad that you're here, Darren. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy, for that generous introduction. I am not a top ethicist, and I am not used to dealing with questions like this, and it's very unusual what has occurred over the last year that I have become embroiled in regarding the issue of how the social sciences are used by politicized interest groups and how that affects scholarship and communities and potentially the law and social movements. And so what I'm going to present is going to be kind of diverse in looking at how the social sciences become politicized, how our structural conditions, especially in state universities like here at California State and my own at Southern Illinois, have been impacted over the last several decades, and how that's privileged private interest money for influencing and further politicizing social scientific discourse on a variety of different issues. This one just happens to be about the issue of same-sex marriage and how a particular study has influenced that. I'm not a very good PowerPointer, so I'll try to get through this. The first thing, there we go. The first thing I wanted to do is kind of present the overall global context of where this debate is occurring in the United States. And this has become one of the pivotal issues in the current election cycle, that this is something that a variety of different interest groups that have been motivated towards. But this is why. This is one simple graph that tells us why this issue has become such a pivotal issue in contemporary politics. In 1988, in the General Social Survey, one of our last remaining scientific surveys of the American population, scientific being a very important word to me with reference to public opinion studies. Science requires certain standards that are required for everything that we do with statistics, with making statistical inferences about data. Statistics should always be conservative. We are not liberal with our statistics, because being liberal with our statistics leads to erroneous inferences that can cause us to think things that are not true, to make inaccurate statements. But in the General Social Survey in 1988, for some reason, when nobody was really thinking about it, they added a question about same-sex marriage. Do you think that homosexuals should be allowed to marry? Very simple question was asked. And in 1988, 73% of Americans said no. They either disagreed or strongly disagreed with that question. And only 12% in 1988, not that long ago for someone my age, said that they agreed or strongly agreed that homosexuals should be allowed to marry. That's the way the question was asked. As you can see, they didn't even bother to ask this question again. Nothing predicted the responses to that except for education in 1988. They didn't even ask it again until 2004. And by that time, you can see that almost 30% of Americans decided that they agreed. That, no, I think same-sex couples should be allowed to be married. But still, almost 56% disagreed. As we move from 2004, not very long ago at all, in the scheme of actual trends in American public opinion, we don't see things like this. This is very unique in charting this trend. 2004, it's almost 30%. Just 2 years later, the GSS is now biennial, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. We only do it every 2 years. We used to do it yearly. We don't have funds to do it anymore. 2008, nearly 40% agreed. By 2010, we see that the proportion of Americans who support marriage rights for same-sex couples exceeds the proportion who don't support it, who disagree. That is fascinating. We don't know what these proportions are right now. Anything that you read in the newspaper is garbage. You might as well just make up a statistic yourself over drinks or coffee or something like that. But if you want science, we'll know sometime in December. I'm hoping to know maybe in December. Public release will come out in January or February from the 2012 General Social Survey. Science is slow, and it's expensive, and it's difficult. And we've been disadvantaged in the United States over the last 30 years. One of the things also about science is it's complicated. And at the top level of public opinion research and social scientific research in general, this is what science looks like. And for things that get published in top-tier general interest social scientific journals, which have rejection rates of about 90%, you're expected to use data of highest quality, taken from nationally representative samples, drawn randomly from the population that we're targeting. And we're expected to use measures of our concepts that reflect thoughtful processes of measuring what we're trying to measure. And we're expected to estimate models that interrelate those concepts together using advanced statistical techniques. In this case, what I'm doing for my last publication in the journal Social Science Research, on which I've served the editorial board for the last 12 years, this is examining the effects of both political orientations and political ties and religious orientations and religious ties on support for same-sex marriage. One of the things that I disentangle there that I'm very proud of is that there are independent effects of political conservatism and Republican Party affiliation on opposition to same-sex marriage, above and beyond religious fundamentalism and sectarian religious ties. The dominant political narrative in the United States has been that the reason why Republicans don't like same-sex marriage is because they've been taken over by the fundamentalists, right? What I show here, using the most advanced techniques possible, nonlinear structural equation models estimated on latent variables, using public opinion data of the highest quality possible, is that no. There are independent effects of both. Politics matter. Political institutions matter. What they say about same-sex marriage has an effect on the people who adhere to those political parties or to those political values, even above and beyond religious propensities, like religious fundamentals and other interesting things I find. Catholics love marriage. They don't care what it is. As long as there's booze
At the wedding, they're okay with it. So there's a difference between what people in the pews think and what people with the pointy hats think. This raises some kind of questions about how do political institutions and values motivate social science research? What are the political consequences of particular research questions? And how is social scientific research conducted? Who pays for it? And this is something that has changed profoundly over the last 3 decades that I've seen in my own career. Funding for social scientific research began to erode in the late 1970s with Carter's austerity budgets, which led to a dramatic decrease in the amount of funding, especially from the National Science Foundation, that was going towards social scientific endeavors. If we're going to fund science, it's going to have to be real science, not that mushy social science stuff. And in a way, that mushy social science stuff attitude has been something that depoliticized a lot of sociology for a long period of time. People didn't really listen to sociologists about politically important questions on a lot of different issues for a long period of time. Maybe in basic demography or medical sociology or a few key things on describing inequalities. Yes, okay. But it was largely politically neutral. This is different from what we saw in political science or some areas of political science, especially like international relations, which have been heavily politicized since the 1930s, largely driven by funds from private organizations that went into political science research. In sociology, we were able to kind of bop along under the radar, doing our irrelevant research that nobody would read or care about. And that was kind of good, in a way. Ronald Reagan ushered in a new real era of defunding of education in general. And this created an enormous scramble for funds in social science departments. It used to be that most major universities would have a survey research center that did basic research. It didn't do institutional research for the dean. It didn't do political research for the media or for political organizations or something. It did basic research where scholars would get together and say, what are you interested in researching? Let's put together a questionnaire. Let's administer it. Let's examine this. By the 1980s, most of those centers were gone at most campuses. And the rest of them were scrambling for funds from anywhere. And this really changed the game. We saw that private foundations became much more influential in people's careers and for funding survey research in general and publication. The decline of resources also had concomitant effects on the general academic atmosphere. And those of you on the faculty all know this, that with the restriction of resources, there came to be increased competition for jobs, for grants, and it changed what was expected of people to make tenure, to publish. In the social sciences, we're all basically article-driven disciplines. Your cachet, what's going to keep you from being fired from your job, is peer-reviewed publication. And that didn't used to be the case. Just a few decades before then, people would get tenure for having a beating heart and a PhD. I remember stories from many of my colleagues at Vanderbilt about how they were walking around the American Sociological Association meetings in the late 1960s, and older men, of course, always, would come up to them and say, "Are you looking for a job? You look like a hippie. You must be a grad student. You need a job?" That doesn't happen anymore. I know people who were hired in as full professors based on that they'd finished their dissertation and maybe had a book contract or a few articles. All of that changed. There was increasing competition for publication, which led to the development of more journals and to more papers being submitted to the journals